and we are going live on Facebook. Welcome everybody, this is Don't Tell Me, Ask Me. I'm Beverley Webb and I'm so excited today because I'm joined by a fabulous woman known as Elaine Wilkins. Elaine, hello.
Hi Bev, great to see you.
And you too. So for anybody who knows anything about me, I'm a recovery practitioner overcoming or recovery from chronic fatigue, but I specialise in adults overcoming childhood trauma and abuse. But what's even more special about today's guest is the fact that I'm accredited by the Chrysalis Effect, and you hear me talking about the Chrysalis Effect all the time. And Elaine Wilkins is actually the lady behind the Chrysalis Effect.
Yeah, it's lovely to actually have this chat. We've been talking about it for quite a while, haven't we?
We have, and it's so wonderful to actually have you sitting here, and it's happening because before, like with all technology, sometimes it's been quite so nice. So, yeah. Elaine, I would love you to start introducing yourself so that everyone can hear exactly who you are.
Yeah, so I'm actually, well, I'm a mum and a grandmother and all of those wonderful things, but I'm actually the founder of the Chrysalis Effect, which started out life in 2009 as an online recovery pathway for ME, chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia sufferers. We like to call them recoverers and positively frame that. And that was born out of my own experience because I was ill for 6 years. I had an illness that felt to me as if it was sudden. It wasn't, but it ended up being a 6 year journey for me. And so when I went through that experience, there was nothing out there that I needed. It was a very, very difficult journey for me, and I learned through that journey and through the work that we now do with the Chrysalis Effect how stuck people get. I certainly did, and how I was doing all the things that you do, going to the doctors, being referred to consultants, seeing loads of practitioners, and having such a catastrophic health crash that happened to me, and ultimately being told I had to just live with a lifelong chronic condition and illness, and I never ever accepted that was true. And so I'm delighted to be here today, Bev, because we just celebrated last year our 10th anniversary of the Chrysalis Effect, and the recovery pathway was just the beginning. And practitioners like yourself that have either had their own journey or were seeing clients that did not know how to really move people from their symptoms right the way through to recovery. That was the catalyst really for making sure that we had recovery specialists trained. And so the Chrysalis Effect is not only a recovery pathway, but it's a complete wraparound support. It's a biopsychosocial model. So we look at everything that would have impacted a person's well-being and give them great understanding of what's caused the symptoms, what to do about it, and also to have agile team support so they're not isolated, not on their own. Loads of role models in that community who are fully recovered, as you well know, Bev, or they're on that recovery journey. And of course, that my dream was to make recovery accessible to all. Started back in the days with a little website. I think I put £150 in to try and run a workshop just to try and share with people that recovery was possible. And all these years later, the dream is coming true because we're now aligning with the NHS and running pilots and now having GPs and consultants refer. So that's sort of where we're at.
And it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, I can tell you, not an easy one. There were times when I thought, because I always think that this chose me, I didn't choose it. When I first recovered after those 6 years and periods of being bedbound and things, I honestly wanted nothing to do with chronic fatigue. I'd love to sit here, you know, with my halo shining and say, you know, oh, I just was set out on a mission to help everybody. I was just at that phase of my recovery, I was just petrified it was going to come back. So I just, you know, wanted to keep it over there, and went off and did things that I loved. And I trained in coaching, which I'm passionate about, and it underpins everything we do in the Chrysalis Effect, wellbeing coaching. But what happened, of course, the universe had other plans, and I ended up being a coaching trainer and did loads of corporate coaching, and I went in and trained the NHS teams in coaching, and guess what? Everyone that sat in front of me had fatigue issues. So I started just sharing a little bit about what I'd done to recover, and that was it was just uncanny how many people were fatigued, and I realized the extent of the problem. And then something incredible happened. A story broke right across the BBC of a young woman of 34 who'd committed suicide after 17 years of struggling with ME. Her diagnosis was ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis. And so I was horrified and shocked, because the other side of it was that her mother was arrested for aiding and abetting her suicide. And I just kept thinking about myself as a position of a mum, and also, you know, having been through that journey of fatigue. And when I looked into it, there were so many similarities in what had happened to her and what happened to me, but obviously the outcome was dramatically different. And so it was that, and it was by chance. I was seeing a friend who'd also been through a chronic fatigue journey just that day, and she said, have you seen the news? And I said, oh my God, yes. And so we decided then and there that we were going to run this little workshop to try and share what we'd both done to recover. And there were no grand plans at that point. And so we set up a website. As I say, I think I put in £150 to get that going. And we had 1,000 people contact us saying, I can't get to your workshop, can you help me?
Yes.
So that was it. That was the starting point, really.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's ironic also that you're speaking about suicide. I think we've lost you for the minute.
Oh, I can hear you okay, Bev.
I was saying, I think it's ironic that you're speaking about suicide as well, when this week it is Mental Health Awareness Week. So, as you say, I want to take you back to that place where that doctor gave you the diagnosis, which really didn't give you many options at the time.
No,
so so if you could just go back and share with everyone exactly physically what was happening with you and how that impacted on you mentally and emotionally, because as we know, it's all interconnecting.
Oh yeah. So, well, what happened? It's quite hard to tell this story now, because obviously I've got all the hindsight. But at the time, I came back from a long haul flight. I was sort of at the top of my game in a cosmetic company. It was an international company, so I was doing loads of traveling, loads of training, and it was very had to be very upbeat and positive all the time, and I was finding that increasingly hard to do. My energy was suffering, and I was getting lots of symptoms. So I was having headaches, I was having insomnia, I wasn't sleeping very well, and these symptoms seemed to increase. I'd had gut issues since I was a teenager, as many people that develop chronic fatigue have struggled often for a long time. I'd had IBS diagnosed when I was about 15, but of course nobody asked about any stress that I was experiencing or my childhood or anything. So I had all these symptoms, and the headaches were getting into migraines, and I was just medicating. I thought, oh, if I have a glass of wine before I go to sleep, I might actually sleep. Of course, that makes things 10 times worse. I was taking really strong medication for my headaches, and then I was on the ones that melt under your tongue, the very strong migraine medication. I was vomiting with migraines. I was having terrible bloating and gut issues and things, but I was just medicating and carrying on. And so to the world, I was putting on my makeup and I was getting up and going and doing my thing. And then by the time I used to get home at night, I would be absolutely exhausted. And so I would be doing what a lot of people do. I was pushing through, and I was, when people couldn't see me, I was just like a zombie. I was exhausted. I was spending more and more time in bed. And then I went on this trip. And when I got home, it was a long haul trip, and flying has never been my favourite thing, so it's another stressor. And when I got home, I thought I had jet lag. I'd also picked up a throat infection thing, and I think what that did, that was my kind of tipping point. It was a final straw for me, was the virus. My body and system was so stressed and so depleted, and I just still kept, like, it was like flogging a dead horse. I was still beating myself and making myself, where I wouldn't let people down. You know, we know a lot about the profile of chronic fatigue. So I was A-type driven, pushing myself really hard, like to be in control of everything, all things to all people. You know, ours was the party house as well. Friends used to come to me if they had problems. I had all of that going on, 2 teenage kids, and I just thought this jet lag would pass, and it would, and it didn't, and it was really scary. And I literally felt so exhausted that I couldn't get out of bed, and I had lots of muscle pain and things. And so I started doing the rounds of the tests and the doctors and everything, and it took me 18 months to get a proper diagnosis under a consultant, a professor actually of neurology. And I finally got a diagnosis after 18 months, by which time I'd picked up books and things along the way, those lovely books that tell you that if you've got ME, it's a living death, and you've pretty much just got to live with it and expect to be in a wheelchair. So when I got the diagnosis, I had a relief for minutes, and then I realised there was no treatment plan. And what I was offered on 6 occasions was antidepressants and sleeping medication and painkillers. And only one thing was offered to me other than that, and that was an expert patients course, which many people will have heard of. And I went along thinking it was for people with chronic fatigue, and when I got there, it was full of people that had lifelong and life-limiting chronic illness. And I was sitting next to a beautiful young girl of 13 who'd had a terrible accident and had broken her spine and couldn't actually, you know, she had to have a wheelchair. And that course was all about getting your mindset into a place where you accepted your illness. And I was traumatized, because I thought, this isn't my future. I can't live like this. So I didn't go back. And then I tried support groups. So I went to some support groups, and I thought, oh, there, we'll all help each other recover. But what I discovered was that type of support group, and certainly the one I went into, whenever I talked about recovery, people shut down, and everybody was comparing their symptoms and their illnesses, and people couldn't come to the meetings because they were so bedbound and things. And I really noticed that they kind of shut me down when I talked about recovery. So that wasn't a great place for me to be. And so I sort of left that as well. So I was very much on my own, just trying to find my way through. And for months and months, I thought I was trying to come to terms with living with this, but fighting myself and still not sleeping and having all the symptoms. So I started to do what most of us do. You know, I went on that practitioner hop and read everything I could read because for me, the worst bit was that I had a lot of cognitive difficulty. So I had loss of sensation down one side. I couldn't concentrate. My head felt like it was filled with hot cotton wool. And so I couldn't remember anything. And so I seriously couldn't, my business had to go. And it was just a very, very scary time, because I didn't understand any of these symptoms, or why I had no energy, and why the old things I used to do to push through stopped working. And of course, what had happened is I'd tipped over from, you know, think about the continuum, you think about tiredness, normal tiredness, you think about fatigue, and you think about, we all have times when we're exhausted. But then when I look back now, I had mini crashes. I'd had warning crashes through the years, which I didn't know what they were. And of course, I'd I'd managed to bounce back from. This wasn't the same thing. I'd tipped over into somewhere I'd never been before, and it was really frightening. Yeah, so the big thing for me was that I realised, I think I was laying at the time, we had a townhouse, and I was laying in the top of the house. You know, the springs were turning into summers, and the summers were turning into winters, and I was spending huge chunks of my time bedbound with, you know, just trying to find some answers. And I really did feel like sort of the mad woman in the attic, really. And I used to tip over into this terrible fear that, you know, and I can remember saying to my husband, if this is what my life has become, then I'm not sure I want to be here anymore. So I do really understand when people, you know, get to that point. And then I just think I had this realization that if I wanted to get better, then I'd have to do it myself. There was not going to be any knock on my door. And so I think the first step for me was finding Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life. And that was just massive for me. And I started to look at what had led up to my illness. You know, when you are stopped, physically stopped, then you have an awful lot of time to think. And I had to reevaluate, you know, well, how had I lived before I got ill? And I realised that the company I was running didn't really end up aligned with my values. So I was doing things that weren't really right for me, and I was really uncomfortable about a lot of elements of the business that I'd got involved with, and yet I was telling myself I couldn't get out of it because I didn't want to let anyone down. So that was one thing. I also had always worked from home so that I could bring up my children and be there for them. And what had happened, I'd seemed to allow my life to get hijacked, and I'd really become a workaholic. So although I was at home a lot, I was there in body, but I wasn't there in mind. So my children would be talking to me and I would be somewhere else. I was planning, preparing, working. And of course, when you work from home, you can work 24 hours a day if you want. So I wasn't there for people anymore. I'd, you know, stopped seeing friends. My work had taken over my life. And so I really believe that now, looking back, it was a gift. It was making me stop. I had to reevaluate my role as a parent. My son was really acting out at the time, and I was really angry with him, you know, but I've actually realized that he was showing me what was going on for me. I wasn't being honest with how unhappy I was and how my life had got out of kilter. And I really believe, you know, I heard a long time ago that chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, ME, I've heard it said that it's an identity in crisis, and that was where I was at. I was putting on a brave face and living one life, but actually I wasn't really being authentic at all. So yeah, if there's anyone listening to this that's resonating with me, and or any practitioners that have clients in the same place, well, you know, when I came through all this and I did finally recover, what actually stuck with me is that I got 5.5 years into my recovery, and then I had a massive relapse, and it was devastating. But it was, you know, everything happens for a reason. And a friend of mine, I was due to stay with her and just to have a bit of respite, and I asked my husband to cancel and said I couldn't go. Because I was crying, I was so depressed, and I was really in a bad way, and I was almost at the point where I just thought I'm just gonna, in fact, yeah, I did, I caved in and took some antidepressants, which was devastating to me because I've always believed in natural health. And she insisted that my husband drove me down, and thank God we went. And when we got there, there was a nurse there who had chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, and she looked really well, and she told me her story and said, you need to see a naturopath because I really believe you've got an underactive thyroid and you've got adrenal dysregulation. They used to call it adrenal fatigue. And I didn't hold out a lot of hope, but they booked me in then and there to go and see this naturopath. And 2 days later, I was there in this person's office, and I was just like a shell of a person. And I said to him, I used to be dynamic. And he said to me, do you know what? You absolutely can recover. And he explained to me that although I'd done all those things, I'd let go of my business, we'd downsized our house, I'd done so much emotionally and physically, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And for me, the final piece of my puzzle was getting the right supplementation and support around the adrenals and thyroid. So it occurred to me that if I'd have had that a lot sooner, he said to me, it was like you had no charge, you've got no charge in your body, that it was like a run out battery. So it didn't matter what I did, I was working on my backup systems and I kept depleting my body. So, and I'd been years in the sort of physical search for things, and then I'd done all the emotional work, but I still tipped over again. So what I realized when we put together the Chrysalis Effect was that I did research. I researched people that had fully recovered to vibrant health. I didn't research the disease, I researched the recovery. And I think that's what made us different. Without exception, every single person that had fully recovered had addressed 8 key areas. So from that research, I pulled those areas out, and that's what we built into the recovery pathway. And so if you're a practitioner or if you're going through this, you probably, like me, you know, you might have done some piecemeal work, you may have done a bit of changing your diet, or you might have got some really good sleep regulation in. You know, you might have looked at the gut, you may have done some things and felt some improvement. But what I absolutely know is, and this is something we do very early on, is we do an assessment of what people have addressed and where the gaps are, and then start to support them in addressing those gaps. And of course, what we found, our clients and patients have taught us so much. We've just under 4,000 patients come through now. What we've learned and what came out of this was the amount of emotional trauma and adverse childhood experiences, which I know Bev and you and I can, you know, talk about that for hours on end. But I didn't realise that the denial phase of my illness was absolutely predictable because of my ACE scores as a child. I got an ACE score of 7, which is extremely high. And through all those years of going to see people, no one pieced that together. The Chrysalis Effect clients pieced that together for me, because on those health profiles, we saw the level of adversity. And what we then started to understand was how adverse childhood experiences rewires the bright landscapes, the brain, creates hypervigilance, creates a heightened stress response, and creates cover-up behaviours so that you look to the world like you can cope with everything. So I always say externally strong, internally sensitive and anxious. So what I would say is that people need to understand their predisposition, their profile, they need to understand their sensitivity, and they need to understand why that leads to fatigue and fibromyalgia illness. And the bit that nobody wants to address, and the really tough bit, is the emotional trauma and pain. We'd rather feel physical pain than actually be in touch with our emotions. And I was one of those people. Looked like I could deal with everything, but everything was being internalized. And there comes a point where your body can't cope with it anymore. So I would say that, you know, if people are just stuck, it's because there will be emotional unprocessed work to do in there, usually unprocessed grief from losses, or maybe, you know, whatever you live as a child is your norm. So maybe you don't realize that the situation you were in growing up was having a huge impact on you. A lot of the time we see in the profile of people that they feel a bit like a fish out of water. They didn't feel like they fitted in with their family, or fitted in sometimes in school and things like that. And it's usually because sensitives, highly sensitive people, are incredibly empathic and intuitive. And of course, we feel what others feel. So often that's why we become over givers and, put other people's needs first. And often when there's been adversity, there's a sort of ingrained need to prove yourself. And that's where that overachieving and driven behavior comes from. And, if you've not been taught how to care for yourself and nurture yourself, and that you're really important, then you don't know how to do that. So it comes to a point where that lack of self-care has had an impact on you mentally, emotionally, and physically. Bev, so you're hearing from clients. Yeah, that's what you're hearing from clients, and you felt like that too. You've got 3 minutes left. So what's currently happening with the NHS? Well, before the COVID-19, we had all our pilots lined up in with rheumatology consultants and GPs. So we're super excited that we'd got there. So that's all there, sitting there waiting to happen. So what I'm doing during the COVID time is I'm putting together the pain initiative and the CFS initiative, which is a 4-module entry course for people to come through who maybe have been to their doctors, been sent to clinics, and they're stuck. And they're in that place of perhaps not even believing they can recover. Because if you believe you can't recover and you work with that mindset, then sadly that can be the outcome. So we're working on that at the moment, getting that ready. So that's the screening process ready for the pilots. So I'm very excited about that. And also because a lot of GPs have been forced onto Zoom and using online resources, we've had people contact us now from surgeries. I think they can see how it works, that we can give one-to-one personalised support through all this fantastic technology. And because the recovery pathway is instantly accessible, there's no waiting for people. So actually, I think as much as I was disappointed that the NHS stuff has been sort of backburnered a little bit, I think what it's done now is it's opened up the GPs and consultants that were a bit puzzled. How the hell can we help people online when they're used to being in a red brick situation, seeing people in appointments with big waiting lists? They can now see that we can support many thousands of people at the same time, and make sure that recovery is accessible to all. So speaking about COVID, how's that impacted recovery? Well, quite as predicted. I knew, because we have, understand very well the profile of our clients and patients, that they are going to be sensitive, and they're going to be that anxiety switch, that HPA axis gets switched on really, really quickly, and everyone's been made very anxious and stressed and traumatized. There's a fear pandemic around COVID. So we knew that we had to very quickly make sure that we address that. So what we have done is we've brought on board coffee mornings. I call it say it out loud coffee morning, where people can come and they can really say how they're feeling, whether they're anxious, worried, fed up. A lot of people have felt very peaceful and felt very relieved that the world had slowed down. So there's been a lot of benefits, but it is an emotional roller coaster, because we don't know, we don't know the next step, and we don't do well as human beings with uncertainty. But what has been great is that we have been supporting people that have had COVID, that have also had chronic fatigue. So our community has seen absolute evidence that people can fully recover, even if they are challenged with another health issue. And I think it's given them sort of confidence in the fact that the way they are looking after their well-being through the Chrysalis Effect, in actual fact, they're in a very good place to have the resilience around this illness. So yeah, we've just been adapting and giving people what they need at this difficult time. So how does someone find out about the Chrysalis Effect recovery program and practitioner training? So well, the website, I'm sure you'll be able to put that on your your page there, Bev. It's the Chrysalis Effect, www.thechrysaliseffect.co.uk, and you can come on there, and as a recoverer, someone interested in finding out about recovery from, you know, fatigue or adrenal fatigue or ME, chronic fatigue, fibro, there's a 30-day trial on there, so you can come on and immerse yourself in this fantastic community, and you can do that for 30 days and see whether this is a, you know, a really good fit for you. If you're a practitioner helping clients, then we have a referral team and we have a recovery specialist team as well, all work together. So you can come on and you can send in a contact us form from that website, and we will get back to you with the appropriate information. Oh, you're really welcome, Bev. I'm sorry that I can't hear you speaking. It's probably just as well, because you and I, once we get nattering, would have been a long time. But yeah, I think I just wanted to leave everybody with my mantra that I learned the hard way about my health, and my mantra is to honour your well-being above all else. So I hope that helps to give you something to work forward towards. Bye everyone.